This is Cold Star, Tales from the Spine, where the Milky Way meets Andromeda. One voice. One cup of coffee. Sit back. My name is Ned Valen. People remember captains in two ways, the things they did and the people who stayed. I measure myself by who stayed. This is how the crew of the HNSS Argus started, not with a heroic shout, but with grease on hands, a bottle in an inner pocket, and a bargain struck on a dusty landing platform under a low, copper sun. New Reykjavik, Lyra 7's outpost, hangs on the side of a minor trade lane like a loose button. It smells of warm metal, synth broth, and the kind of exhaust that tells you a place is still alive. I came with a second-hand hull and a head full of routes I'd learned the hard way. Bigger ship meant bigger needs, crew, trust, and an ability to make promises you could keep. I had a flask of what I called cold coffee and a head full of intentions. Neither of them were worth anything on a manifest. They were everything to me. Mika was first. She was down in a maintenance pit when I walked in, hands black with flux and a grin like she'd found the joke before anyone else. She's small in the way useful tools are small, compact, deceptively heavy with competence. Her laugh is a ratchet, sharp and useful, and she believes machines have consciences if you listen long enough. She sees things I miss, the way a conduit can be coaxed rather than forced, how a breathing seal yields before a scalding tweak. When she looked up and saw the Argus's engine parts, she didn't simply count their value. She counted the hours she could work on them and the improvements she could make. Her eyes were invitation and assessment both. Tor was a shadow with a ledger. You could tell his breed by the way he squared his shoulders, creditors leave a bend in you. He's tall, practical, and practiced at putting other people's numbers into a loop that somehow made sense. The danger with Tor is he thinks in margins and exits. The good thing about Tor is he knows people who know doors that aren't on maps. He answered to survival. He wore his debts like a second skin and his loyalty like a promise that needed renewing. When he saw the Argus, his mind ran through routes and recruits, who owed whom favors, which couriers were fast and discreet. He liked the idea of moving up from reactive to proactive. Enric had the merchant's face, easy smile, quick hands, the kind of posture that negotiates margins before you know you've surrendered them. He saw opportunity where others saw work, that could be greedy or pragmatic, depending on which week you asked him. He had a knack for making a market look inevitable. To him, a used freighter was not an old hull, it was the beginning of a line that could become a lifeline for the outpost. The platform itself was a small theater of commerce. A kiosk sold toasted fungi cakes that tasted like apology and sugar. A service bot confused me for a bin and tried to deposit a sponge in my boot. There was humor in that, and that humor bridged the first formal moves: no paper, no signatures, only tools, a bottle left half hidden, and a mutual acknowledgement that if this thing worked, all of them would be better off. We needed a pact that was not legal, because law is for people who trust contracts more than breath. We needed a pact that had teeth in coffee. I set the parts on Mika's bench. I slid a sketch of the Argus's layout to Tor and let Enric read the potential profit lines and the margins. Mika agreed to take the technical lead. She wanted, mercifully, to improve the life support and the reflow circuits. She wanted the Argus to run sweeter than most freighters we'd seen. Maybe that was vanity. Maybe it was survival. I liked her answer because it was both. Tor promised to recruit and secure lines. He would call in favors, grease steps on schedules, and find hands whose debt-to-loyalty ratio kept a ship in the air. He didn't promise chastity of law, just reliability of outcome. Enric promised to move cargo and markets, to make the Argus look like a profitable, boring investment to anyone nosy enough to check. He would leverage a few lines of trade, keep the ship busy, and take a small cut for his trouble. That was the skeleton. The flesh came later in the bar. The bar, called the Harrow despite the friendly holograms, is a place where light falls like cheap lacquer and the floor remembers scuffs. People trade news in slurred syllables and trades in measured glances. The harrow had a backroom corner with a table that had carved marks from other people's decisions. It seemed right to put the pack there, where decisions had texture. We drank. Not to celebrate, but to begin what we were actually doing, learning each other's limits. I brought out the flask. Inside was nothing holy, just dark brewed beans reheated and stubborn. It tasted of regret and nourishment both. To me it tasted like memory. I offered it, ritualistically, and the others accepted. A bottle passed hands, a bargain was sealed. It should be said now, alcohol and equivalent intoxicants are integral to trust rituals out in the spine. A man drinks with you to show he will stand, an alien offers a bioluminal nectar to show their metabolism can be trusted. Don't make the mistake of thinking it's only vice. Across 1,000 stars, communal intoxication creates shared risk. You know who will be there when a bad jump leaves you with a broken hull and a longer night. Which is where the trouble arrived. A group from the Novahet clan had been camped near Lyra 7 for months, mercs in trimmed coats who measured threats like offerings measure price. They didn't like strangers reorganizing trade lanes. Words escalated, as words do on platforms, into posture, posture into a shove, shove into a throw. A plate clattered. A server bought word in confusion. A chair met metal and someone's temper flared. I remember how little time it takes for a bar to become an arena. The Novahet's lieutenant, a man called Grev, shoved Tor across the table, not hard, but hard enough. Tor, who kept his debts measured, hit back with a ledger slap more symbolic than forceful. Enric, who hates losing face more than losing credits, stood and threw a gauntlet of words. The harrow filled with the sound of teeth against the underside of a fight. Now, my philosophy about violence is simple: if you must fight, pick fights that make sense. But here, the fight came for reasons as old as platforms, reputation, bruised ego, and other people's hunger. I stood up too, not because I wanted to, but because 3 people I'd bet my name on were involved. The brawl opened like a poorly tuned chorus. Fists, trays, and a severed hollow sign. Mika moved like a machine with affection, precise, calculating, and merciful. She disarmed a man without breaking him and used an impromptu wrench like a baritone instrument. Tor, usually economical with movement, unveiled the kind of patience that counts for violence. He used holds that registered as pragmatism, not cruelty. Enric, peak merchant, started exchanging fists the way he would exchange invoices, fast, aimed for weak points, and done before the authorities could arrive. Then the strange part, a squawk of light and a slippery sound like wet paper. The noise came from the back of the harrow where an outsider had been watching. He was not human. He was a visitor from beyond the common lanes, a Ketheri, if names matter. The Ketheri are a tall, reed-like species whose skin shifts in thin layers like the bark of an old tree. Their eyes are horizontal slits that take in light as texture. They metabolize a fermented sap, something we called amber wine, and they drink it to signify hospitality. That Ketheri, a male, if his gestures translated, rose, stepped between fists, and did something none of us expected: he laughed. Now, Ketheri laughter is a thing like wind in antennae. Sarcastic in the way storms are sarcastic, it rolls and then cuts. His laugh bled the frantic edge from the room because it suggested the fight was an amusing local theater rather than existential cataclysm. The Ketheri, named Valish, moved with a dancer's gravity and diffused tension by offering an amphora of amber wine, first to Grev, then to Tor, then to me. That amphora in Ketheri culture is a symbol: you accept, and you acknowledge your shared mortality. Grev blinked like a dog that had been told to heel. He took a sip. The alcohol hit him in a way that did not dull aggression but rearranged priorities. He loosened his jaw. Someone clapped a shoulder. The harrow's fight tapered like a tide. Then another figure emerged from a shadowed doorway, a Sarnik, squat and bear-like, with fur patched by ceremonial burns and webbed fingers that could grip rope or pliers equally well. Sarnik barked laughter and clapped a man on the back with enough force to stun. The Sarnik's local equivalent of spirits is a fermented kelp mash called sea smoke. He offered a small jar around. The fight cooled further, the brawl became a series of stories told over bruises. That night, the violence ended not with arrests but with an improvised sharing. Grev and Tor traded details, routes, owed favors, names of dangerous jump points. Enric negotiated a less humiliating exit for Novahet's lieutenant. Mika joked about welding two people's pride together. I realized, sipping my cold coffee, that sometimes friendship is simply a fight politely resolved. We had bled a little, we had laughed, and now there was a ledger between us that included empathy. The Kethri and Sarnik left with nods that meant more than they would on paper. Valish, the Kethri, wove a promise into his parting gift: if Argus ever needed passage near the Kethri reefs, he'd know a safe channel. The Sarnik promised a favor from his dockside crew in New Venice if we ever needed a heavy hand. Favors are currency in the spine, having foreign credit lines is better than a bank account. But relationship is not a stable thing you hang on a peg. Trust has edges and deadlines. The night taught me the difference between hiring people who can work and having people who will stand. There is value in both. You can buy talent. You can't always buy who will cover your back when the universe makes an inconvenient mess of you. We left the Harrow with new nicknames and new bruises. Tor's jaw was puffy but functional, he had a list of recruits in his pad. Mika had a wrench with a new notch and a plan for rerouting Argus's air exchangers. Enric had sketched preliminary contracts in the condensation on his glass. I had a pocket that felt heavier for reasons beyond parts, the weight of expectation, and the warm, papery weight of a small paper with a single line: crew assembled. Proceed. That night I walked to my new old ship and inspected the hull as if it were a living thing. She creaked like an animal settling down. The cabin smelled of oil and old maps. I placed the flask into a small locker and, for the first time in a while, imagined waking to a crew that trusted each other enough to tell the truth when it mattered. I would be captain of something that was more than an engine and a manifest. We'd be a small, broken family that could fix things. There is a strange intimacy in the business end of a bargain. I had paid my price, not with credits, but with the promise of risk, with the sharing of labor and hours and the willingness to be accountable. The others had done the same in their own currencies, Mika with skill, Tor with networks, Enric with markets. In the spine, you make your family with what you have. Before I climbed into the Argus's cramped bunk for a few hours of sleep, I opened the locker and took the flask out. The coffee was the same bitter friend it had always been. I drank and thought of how fragile alliances are and how resilient they might be if tended. The bottle wasn't for show. It was for the long run. The next morning we would get to work, and the day after that we would find out whether we were a crew or merely a collection of people with overlapping schedules. But for that night, with the platform humming and the stars low and patient, I allowed myself a small, selfish hope, that this ragged group of misfits would keep each other alive long enough to keep the Argus flying. Favors would be called in, credits tracked, and decisions that felt impossible today would be handled by routines tomorrow. A captain's promise is worth less than the hands that hold the tools. I had the hands. That, in the end, felt like a beginning. End.